Next, we're bringing up one of our own, one of our probably easily the most prolific Canary media writer. I don't know how he sleeps and eats in between filing all the words and stories that he manages to do. Jeff St. John. Jeff St. John, come on out. And he's going to be interviewing, as we said, Commissioner David Hochschild from the California Energy Commission.
Awesome. Thanks, man.
Yeah. Hey, great to see you again. Yeah, let's give a bigger round of applause, though. These are big deals. These guys are big deals.
Thanks, Julian. I probably drink too much coffee, but apparently it doesn't affect my sleep. Chair Hochschild, David Hochschild of the California Energy Commission, thanks very much for joining us. I was going to ask you a question that this audience might already know, just to start. What is the California Energy Commission? What is it in charge of? And what do you do? How many people already know the answer to that question? Raise your hand. Okay. Well, maybe you can tell us a little bit for the folks who are here, and specifically what the CEC is doing that you think is really, people should really focus on in terms of enabling the energy transition.
I will answer that, but first, what a week. What a week, right? Man, I have to say, this last few weeks, I found myself rooting for Marjorie Taylor Greene and James Comey and John Bolton and rooting for the Dodgers in the World Series. And now, feeling good after Election Day. I'm like, what is going on? So I've been at the Energy Commission as chair now for the last 6.5 years. And so we're California's energy policy and planning agency. We got about 1,000 people. We're doing everything we can to get California to 100% clean energy future. We're deploying about $4 billion on EV charging infrastructure. We're doing all the offshore wind process, energy storage, solar efficiency. We set all the codes and standards for new construction. We rank #1 in the United States on energy efficiency and water efficiency and want to keep it that way. And we operate what is, in my view, the best clean energy research and development program in the world. And so we're really, I think, as a state, the keepers of the flame of hope on the clean energy future, and that's what our agency is focused on, and we're going to stay on the path.
Right on.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, what would you, we're doing pretty well so far, California. I don't know if you have a kind of a sense of kind of what has happened in, let's say, the last 4 years that you think is particularly kind of successful in terms of what California has been able to accomplish.
Yeah, so I'm struck by how many really significant milestones are pretty much totally unknown in this space. California's been the incubator for the world on clean energy, right? We were the home for the first rooftop solar system in the world, first utility-scale solar, first terrestrial wind, first energy storage project, first electric vehicle, first energy codes and standards. And that stuff is winning. Last year in the US, 96% of new capacity added to the grid was clean energy. And that wouldn't be the case but for California. And here at home, we're now almost 70% of the electricity coming from clean sources. Alternative energy is the wrong word to use to describe renewables. Fossil's alternative. We have more EV charge plugs than we have gasoline nozzles in California. 201,000 EV charge plugs, 120,000 gasoline nozzles. We just hit 29% of vehicle sales being electric. There we go. And some just dazzling projects in this sort of galaxy of good things happening right here next door in Oakland. The first city in the US to fully electrify their school bus fleet. So 74 buses, 74 chargers. And so 100% of the kids going to school on a public bus are going electric. And those buses come back in at the end of the day and they charge and they send power back to the grid. It's the largest vehicle to grid project in the US. And this, I think it's super compelling. It doesn't get the attention that it deserves. But when you add it all up together, what is happening is we are transitioning to 100% clean energy future, and it's working. Because as we've done this, we've gone from the 10th biggest economy in the world to the 5th biggest, and we are pioneering all these new technologies of the future We're hosting a group of 40 legislators in a month from around the country to come do a tour of all this electrification. We're taking them to Verity in Richmond, which is doing all-electric construction equipment, to Monarch in Livermore, which is doing electric tractors, to Zoom in Oakland with electric school buses. We're building a fleet of 5 battery electric ferries, here in San Francisco Bay, the first in North America. And we got Gradient doing super low cost electric heat pumps, and Copper doing electric induction cooktops. I mean, all of this stuff, there's somebody from Copper right here. But all of this stuff taken together is super exciting. And I think, we together have to broadcast that this is happening and it's working. Not to sugarcoat any of the big challenges we're facing, but overall, Trump cannot put the genie back in the bottle. The energy transition is going to happen. Yeah.
Well, thanks for kind of outlining all the first of a kind projects. I mean, the Zoom project is very cool across the channel from where I live in Alameda, and I got to go see that, and it's very cool. I guess the next challenge is to just multiply it, exponentially. And I know that there are a lot of pretty significant challenges to doing that. You mentioned the Trump administration as being one of them. But I mean, within the state apparatus itself, I figured that one of the bigger ones that we have to face right now is the challenge of just scaling up the clean energy generation and storage capacity that we need. And I don't know if there's anything in particular that the CEC is doing there that we should touch on, including the new streamlined, expedited permitting process, the opt-in certification program. I know that there was a big project, the Darden energy storage, or energy, it's a solar and storage project down in Westland's Water District area that just got permitted. And what would you say, how would you describe how the CEC is managing this expedited permitting process and kind of managing the challenges that could come with that as communities are concerned about environmental issues, about, equity issues being brought to some of these, disadvantaged communities down there?
Yeah, so just to paint the context a little bit, for a long time, even as our population was growing in California, the energy demand stayed basically flat. And that's because we were making huge progress on energy efficiency. So we do all these standards at the Energy Commission for televisions that cut the energy use in half, and computers and lighting, moving from incandescent to LEDs and all these things. Now we're at the point where there's so much electrification happening, and because of the additional heat, there's more air conditioning load. So energy demand is going up, and we have to meet that need reliably and clean. And so we're deploying a lot more new power plants, but they're clean. So we have about, just for context, electricity came to California in the gold rush. 1850-ish in San Francisco was when the first light bulb went on. And in that 150 years since, 170 years, it's been basically 105 gigawatts of capacity have been added, on the utility side, the utility scale generation. About 30 of that is just since Gavin Newsom became governor. So a huge amount of new capacity, and it's essentially what we're doing now. We have another 20 gigawatts in our pipeline. It's basically all solar and storage. That's what's dominating. That's what's cheapest. And so you mentioned Darden. This was under a new fast-tracked permitting process that we have. And that's the largest battery project in the world, $5 billion project in West Fresno County. We're trying to do this stuff the right ways. We did 9 community benefits agreements to provide grants to the local community. That project, when they break ground in a few months, it's going to be 1,000 people put to work building that thing. And this is the future. And it's interesting to me how many other technologies get all this attention. I mean, I just think solar and storage is going to be the backbone. And then, we'll be doing other things on top of that. But that has been really exciting. And it mirrors, I think there's technology innovation. And we just started California battery hub to drive next generation, battery technology. But there's something else just as important, which is process innovation. How do we do this stuff faster, better, more efficiently? And so, this new reform on doing the power plant process faster is important. And we did also a reform on the customer side of the meter, where we're now switching from doing, typically it was taking 30 to 60 days to permit rooftop solar and storage to now it's an instant over the internet permit. And so that feels good. Yeah.
Yeah. That's the CalApp program?
CalApp.
Like Solar App Plus and like Symbium and stuff like that. Yeah, I was going to ask you about the home front because, obviously the CEC is driving, solar permitting kind of standardization and automation. Obviously, efficiency codes are a big part of what you all do, and then EV charging incentives. What is happening recently that you think the audience should know about when it comes to what the CEC is doing on the places that we live and work?
Yeah, so every 3 years we do a new energy code. It's a really, really important thing because that makes our homes really efficient, but it also essentially becomes an incubator for new industries. So, the code we did a year ago, which basically is driving heat pumps mainstream, we're going to go from 1% of new construction being all electric a decade ago to pretty much 100% next year. And that's helping scale the heat pump industry. And then, those industries can be better positioned to do retrofits on existing homes. And the same thing, with rooftop solar, we're adding about 1 gigawatt of capacity annually just from the requirement that we put to have solar in every new building. And so those codes are really an important piece of the puzzle. And that's both for energy efficiency and for water efficiency, because we are doing shower heads, faucets, toilets, washing machines, all that stuff. So it all ties together.
I did want to ask, I know that there was an attempt by some groups to kind of put in a requirement for all new air conditioners to be bidirectional heat pumps. I think the CEC passed on that. I don't know if you can talk about how you guys kind of balance pushing the envelope on getting the requirements for new technologies against where you think the installers and the manufacturers of these equipment are at.
Yeah, no, that's coming. So we have an authority given to us by my now colleague and former state Senator Nancy Skinner. For those of you who know her, let's give her a round of applause. She's amazing. And we're super, super blessed to have her as a commissioner now at CEC. So she passed a law called SB 49, which, this is in support of this vision we all share to make everything that connects to the grid a good citizen of the grid and have the ability for the grid operators to dispatch these resources. So we did our first standard under that, which was for pool pumps, which is a pretty big load actually in California, to make those dispatchable. But we are going to be doing that with heat pumps and a bunch of other appliances. And I think it's important when these things get rolled out to really try to stick the landing. And this is kind of the art of this type of policymaking, because you can actually go too fast sometimes and then you fail, and then your authority gets revoked, right? And so it's a balancing act of trying to stage these things in ways that are going to support long-term success. So we haven't gone as quickly as I would have liked, but that stuff is all coming.
Cool. Yeah. And I know that, the CEC is doing a lot of cool stuff on the kind of grid responsive stuff. I think that the Midas kind of database of rates that kind of, I don't know how it works, to be honest with you, but I got to go figure it out. It sends out kind of like differential rates across, across many different communications channels. You guys are doing the Redwoods program, kind of like, variable pricing for EV charging and stuff like that. How would you characterize the readiness of all of us in this room and everyone else who lives in California to have a bunch of stuff in their house and maybe the cars in their driveway be grid responsive against the anticipated kind of need and value of the CEC kind of pushing the envelope on getting all that stuff grid responsive.
Mm-hmm. You know, it's funny. I'm here with my wife, who's in the back. Cynthia, you want to wave? And she was listening to the first part of the thing. She's like, "This is a total geek fest," and she's not wrong. So, welcome to our community, Cynthia. No, I mean, long term, we got to get there. Everything's got to get smarter, and I think we will get there. It'll happen in phases, and you know, if you think about, for example, this project I just mentioned in Oakland with the electric school buses. The vehicle to grid, right? We have a huge amount of energy storage, you know, on the system now. We have 17 gigs, but we have probably 3 to 4 times that amount on 4 wheels, right? With all the, we're adding, you know, 1,300 EVs a day. Vehicle to grid actually makes sense to start with buses. School buses are actually a great use case, and there's a whole bunch of reasons why that's an easier place to begin with vehicle to grid than with passenger vehicles, although it will happen eventually with passenger vehicles. So a lot of this is about staging the things that are best suited to work and where the barriers are lowest. So not everything will roll out at the same time, but I mean, that is where we're headed. And by the way, that is both a cleaner and a cheaper future, because to operate some of these standalone gas peaker plants that operate only a few hours a year, I think the state spent like $1 billion on these, 3 once-through cooling gas plants on the coast, which hardly operate. That's incredibly costly, and you can actually meet that same need cleanly. And this is what we're trying to do with our virtual power plant now, the
Right.
demand-side grid support, where we've been scaling that in the last 3 years. We've gone from 0 to 1.2 gigawatts, which that's half the size of Diablo Canyon, and it's growing. And we have 100,000 people participating in that program with their home battery systems and so forth. And so that is what the future looks like.
Well, I think we should probably talk about demand-side grid support, DSGS, because this gets into some of the parts of what happened this year in state policy that I think folks are not maybe as thrilled about, certainly in the kind of in the group of people who are working on DSGS, because that program, as you said, it's scaled up really big. I think the Brattle Group has done some analysis showing how important it is. Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory has a long-standing kind of study of the value of flexibility there. I know that PG&E called it the biggest VPP in the world when they ran a big test of it, but the budget has been cut. Julian and Mark mentioned the VPP bills that were vetoed by Governor Newsom. And I guess I'm wondering what's going on with that right now? How would...
Yeah, so that, on those bills, that is above my pay grade. I will just make a vigorous defense of this program, because if you just step back and look at how it operates, this is really good for ratepayers, all right? We, the ratepayers, don't pay anything for this infrastructure. So you install a battery storage system and solar in your home, you pay for all of that, and then you sign up for this program and you get compensated when the grid needs you to send power back, and it's dispatchable. So that's what we want, is a button we can push so the power comes on, but we're not having to pay for the infrastructure. And it's also very fast to deploy. And I mean, I just want to highlight, when we are talking about, if you want to build a new gas power plant in the United States, it's 7 years out now, 2032, okay? The build cycles for these storage projects and residential storage projects are measured in months. And so this is coming online really quickly. This program, we will be bigger than Diablo Canyon, which is by far the biggest power plant in the state. And it's working. CAISO did a big test this summer. It was super successful. And I had the CEO of CAISO call me, kind of blown away at how well this has worked. And so, I'm a big supporter and big believer, and I have shared that, with the governor and with everybody who listen. This is a program that's working, and we got to keep the momentum going. And I think, the truth is, we have not had to do a flex alert in the last 3 years, and that's a function of the success. Yeah, so And that's a function of the success of this program and of adding all this other capacity. But one of the downsides of that, I think, is it makes it look like everything's solved. And
Right.
so
And it hasn't been that hot the last couple summers.
and we've got lucky with the climate, which I think we got to acknowledge. This was actually a pretty mild summer. The summer before that was the hottest summer and the highest energy demand in the history of the state. And we got through that without a flex alert and without an outage. But the sort of standard that we have to meet is increasing because load is increasing, and severe weather and so on. So this is an insurance policy, and I think it's a great deal. And so I'm all for keeping it strong.
Yeah, and I mean, it does appear. I know that there's been a lot of debate in the Public Utilities Commission and at CAISO, the state grid operator, about how to establish the kind of costs and benefits of programs like these. And it can get really complicated when you get into stuff like load impact protocols and just like how much load you did drop versus your baseline. And did these folks actually hit their prescribed resource adequacy kind of commitments and stuff like that? I think there's an interesting challenge, perhaps, amongst regulators of utilities to acknowledge that one simply has to keep doing something until it scales to the point where its cost effectiveness exceeds question. But I don't know if that's true. And I don't know how the CEC works with its fellow agencies, the PUC and CAISO, to kind of walk that middle road between allowing the perfect to be the enemy of the good and kind of choking these things off because one might deem that they're not cost effective in one way, versus opening the floodgates and maybe paying a bunch of Tesla Powerwall owners more than they deserve, I guess.
Yeah, look, I think, first of all, there is a constellation of agencies in this space in the state. We don't always see eye to eye and everything. And I think you got to enter the field knowing that there's some degree of healthy tension. But it's really important that we step back and learn the basic lesson about this whole movement, which is innovation does make things better and cheaper. And I come out of the solar industry. I spent most of my career. I got into it in 2000, and solar panels were the most expensive resource on the power market, by far, right? But if you just looked even then at the trends, every time global demand for solar doubled, the price goes down 20%, and you could see where that was going. And so we put a lot of work in, all of us, in this community, to scale those policies and to get the industry to go big and to continue to innovate. And now solar is the cheapest resource in the market. Literally, a 98% reduction in cost over the last 25 years. And we're not done, by the way. There's still a lot more cost reduction to happen, and that's bearing a ton of fruit for us. And so the same thing is true with these kind of policies and technologies. And so, when you're making an assessment about the value of a program like virtual power plants and so on, and some of the bumps in the road, and I will be the first to say, not everything when we start off worked swimmingly. They say good judgment comes from experience, and experience comes from bad judgment. We all have bumps in the road, but looking at the larger learning curve, it's very clearly promising and worth staying on this path.
I did want to make sure to give you a chance to talk about how the state and the CEC is kind of adapting to this new era of the Trump administration. I don't want to go through the litany of what the Trump administration is doing on a national level necessarily. I know that in California, I believe that there might have been some cuts to DOE funds for the CEC. I'm not sure. I know that there was speaking to representatives of tribes up in Humboldt County that lost their DOE grant for a microgrid project. And I think we're still kind of waiting to see what happens to some of the much larger kind of billion-dollar-plus grants for PG&E and the like. And I don't know if there. What can the state do in the face of that kind of clawback of funds?
Yeah, well, look, first I want to just share a little story. My wife made a really wonderful point about a month ago. We had this neighbor after Trump was elected. We live here in Berkeley, and our neighbor printed out these little signs, sort of handprinted, just said resist. And so everyone in our neighborhood had these in our windows for a while. And Cynthia said after a while, that word doesn't capture the totality of what we need. It's not actually kind of the operative word. The real word is create. And she shared this quote, which really resonated for me, from Buckminster Fuller, something to the effect of, don't fight to tear down or dismantle old paradigms, build a new paradigm that by virtue of its success will make the old paradigm obsolete, right? And
That's cool.
yeah, and that is what we have to do. And we're doing that, in energy, we're doing that in democracy, I would say. And I really see us in California leaning into this create mode. Luckily, we're a well-resourced state, and so, yes, there has been arson committed by the Trump administration on all of our federal agencies, on so many worthy grant programs, and including for the tribes. And by the way, that's especially egregious. How many promises have been broken to Native American tribes in this country and in this state? But we're not going to let that, no, we're not going to accept that. We at the Energy Commission have done $130 million for 35 Native American tribes to do tribal energy sovereignty projects, solar, battery, microgrids, and EV charging, and we're all in on that. So not going to let that stop us.
Right.
But also to recognize it does make everything harder, and it's going to make things more expensive, because you take away solar, wind tax credits and that kind of thing. We're really impacted by that. This is definitely headwinds, but I think we will get through the storm. We've done that before, and we have a really powerful muscle, I would say, of being a state that can survive a lot. I mean, just looking back at the last 5 years, I'm a native California. I can't remember a period where there were this many crises kind of compressed with wildfire and COVID and blackouts and drought and Trump and so on. And I think one of the things that comes out, and I'm putting him in that category, but
biblical plague.
Yeah, it's pretty biblical. But I do think you build a muscle of how to navigate through that, and a will to do that. And I just feel, super blessed to be in a state that's basically aligned on this and have a governor who's committed. So we're going to get through. Yeah.
Well, I just want to say that I know I've talked to the folks at Blue Lake Rancheria, which was a CEC-funded, I think, EPIC microgrid grant. And I think that, the CEC has funded some of the most significant microgrids in the country. I could be wrong.
Yeah.
Besides military bases and stuff like that. So
that's a great story. That is a 2017 grant we did, $5 million, 480 kW solar microgrid, first tribal energy microgrid, and that's in a community on the North Coast where these tribes are losing power like 10 times a year. Power is it's like water as a utility. People depend on it for medical devices and so on. This was an area that was getting a lot of fires that were burning transmission lines. Right after the microgrid went in, we called them because there was a fire that did burn down the transmission line, and their light stayed on, the communities went off, and our phone call was the one that let them know the power had gone off everywhere else because the light stayed on, and they kept the first aid clinic going, and then they've been really helpful, that tribe, in talking to others and helping other tribes do microgrids like that.
Yeah, that is a cool story, and it's also, I think, more cost effective perhaps than the alternative. I don't know what it would cost for PG&E to reduce the level of outages along those very long, kind of relatively low voltage transmission corridors into that area. But I would imagine that there are ways to reduce costs there for rural residents. I am wondering if there's any kind of work that you think the CEC is doing that kind of brings its experience with innovative utilization of these technologies that are getting cheaper and cheaper, solar and batteries primarily, to play in really laser focusing on the drivers of utility rate increases that we heard about earlier, essentially the fixed costs of largely distribution assets right now. I know that's more of a CPUC thing, to be precise, but is there any work that's going on that's kind of like marrying those two things?
I think we're at the point where it's not about new technology. It's really about the programs to make use of this existing technology. And so it's the demand side grid support virtual power plant program. And that's why that's so important. That's actually the innovation that matters now. We're adding about 1,300, we're up now to 2,000 customer-owned battery systems a week in California. And that technology works. And so how to make use of those so that they can actually support the grid because for grid reliability, it's not that many hours a year where we're really concerned about potential outages. It's like 30 to 60 hours a year, and it's July, August, September, 4 to 9. And so it's really, just very pinpoint. And so you can build a super expensive, massive, high cost to maintain centralized power plant, or you can just tap into this distributed network that's also scaling faster. And, that's the way we got to go. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, I think we're getting close to time. So let me ask you one last question, which is what have I forgotten to ask you so far?
Well, maybe I'll just close with just a story. The tribal work has been, for me, one of the most extraordinary and special and rewarding parts of this job. And I think there's a story in the North Coast of what the tribes have done up there that we should all take some hope and inspiration from, because the Hoopa, the Karuk, Bear River, Yurok, a bunch of these tribes have done an amazing thing in taking down the 4 dams on the Klamath. So the largest dam removal project in the world. And at the same time, there was something else very beautiful that happened, again, led by the tribes, which was to bring back the condor. So, 100 years ago, the hunters that came into that part of the state, used lead bullets. The condor don't eat anything that's alive. They just eat carrion. And they would go to the carcass of a deer or an elk that had been shot, and they'd get lead poisoning. They became extinct in that region of the state. And the population went down something like 22 birds or something. And then they had this very, very focused, successful program to incubate the birds back. And in the Yurok culture, the condor, so it's the highest flying bird in that region, 9.5-foot wingspan. They live to 75 years old. They're incredible birds. And they're thought in that culture to be the medium for humanity's hopes to express to the heavens, and then because they're so high flying, to then in turn confer wisdom down to people. So you can imagine the significance of losing this bird. And so I went to go watch this condor reintroduction, and I'd never even seen a live condor, and I just felt all this emotion coming up through me. I'm feeling it now, just telling this story is so magical. And now the condor are back, and they're introducing 6 birds a year. And I just think, I think all of us hold in our hearts the desire to actually not just leave the world as we found, leave it better than we found it. And that story of restoration is one I think we can all take home with us. So
awesome.
Thank you, guys.
High flying. Thank you, David.
Thank you so much.